What if I told you that the night my ex-boyfriend called me a pathetic loser in front of our entire high school class was the same night I'd been planning to reveal the empire I'd built in secret? Picture this: 20-year reunion, designer dress, and a helicopter waiting on the football field. But the real story isn't about the money or the aircraft. It's about the quiet girl everyone underestimated who spent 2 decades turning whispers into wealth while her former tormentors assumed she'd never amount to anything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The gilded invitation to Westfield High's 20-year reunion had been sitting on my mahogany desk for 3 months, untouched and unopened like a designer dress still wrapped in tissue paper. Madison Clark, class of 2004, was cordially invited to reconnect with old friends and celebrate shared memories at the Grand Ballroom of the Marriott downtown Phoenix. The irony wasn't lost on me that they'd chosen the same hotel where I'd just closed a $40 million acquisition deal the week prior. My fingers traced the embossed lettering as rain pelted the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. On the 32nd floor of the Camelback Tower, Phoenix sprawled beneath me like a circuit board, all organized lines and glowing connections, much like the tech empire I'd been quietly building since graduation. Most of my former classmates probably still thought of me as the awkward girl who ate lunch alone in the computer lab, debugging code while they planned weekend parties I was never invited to. The truth was more complex, as truth usually is. I hadn't been lonely in that computer lab. I'd been learning. While they were perfecting their social hierarchies, I was mastering algorithms that would eventually make me more money than any of them could imagine. While they were dating and breaking up and creating drama that seemed earth-shattering at 17, I was creating the foundation for what would become Phoenix's most successful cybersecurity firm. But they didn't know that. According to my carefully maintained social media presence, Madison Clark was a freelance web designer working from a modest apartment in Tempe. My LinkedIn profile listed a small consulting business with generic client testimonials. My Instagram showed hiking photos and coffee shop visits, the kind of deliberately unremarkable life that drew no attention or questions. I'd learned early that invisibility was often more valuable than recognition, especially when you're building something that could change everything. The reunion committee had found me through my high school email address, the same one I'd maintained, for continuity across various business dealings. Their enthusiastic messages about reconnecting with old friends and sharing life updates had accumulated in my inbox like digital tumbleweeds. Sarah Martinez, former student council president and current real estate agent, had been particularly persistent in her outreach. Her messages carried that familiar tone of forced enthusiasm that barely concealed genuine curiosity about who had succeeded and who had failed. I'd almost deleted the invitation without opening it. Almost. But something about the timing felt significant. 3 months ago, when the invitation arrived, I'd been in the final stages of negotiations with a Fortune 500 company that wanted to acquire my cybersecurity algorithms. The deal would make me wealthy beyond anything my 18-year-old self could have comprehended. It would also make my success impossible to hide behind carefully constructed social media facades. The decision to attend had been brewing in my subconscious for weeks. Not because I missed high school or felt nostalgic for teenage memories that ranged from forgettable to actively unpleasant, but because I'd reached a point in life where hiding felt more exhausting than revealing. 20 years of careful invisibility had served its purpose. The empire was built. The foundation was solid. The time for secrecy was ending. My assistant, Jennifer Walsh, knocked softly on my office door before entering with her usual efficient grace. She'd been with me for 5 years, one of the few people who understood the complete scope of what we'd built together. Jennifer knew about the government contracts, the celebrity clients, the international partnerships that generated more revenue in a month than most people saw in a lifetime. She also knew about my preference for anonymity, for conducting business through intermediaries and shell companies that kept my name out of industry publications. The helicopter is confirmed for Saturday evening, she said, placing a leather folder on my desk. Pilot Johnson will have the Augusta Westland ready at Scottsdale Airport by 7 p.m. The landing coordinates for Westfield High's football field have been cleared with local air traffic control and the school administration. I nodded, still staring at the invitation. The helicopter had been an impulsive addition to the evening's plans, suggested half-jokingly during a phone call with my attorney when we were discussing how to make a memorable entrance at future business conferences. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt appropriate. Dramatic, perhaps. Excessive, definitely, but appropriate for someone who'd been underestimated for 2 decades. "Any word from the security team?" I asked, flipping through the folder's contents. Background checks on reunion attendees, venue layout, contingency plans for various scenarios that might arise when anonymity meets exposure. Marcus Rodriguez and his team will be positioned throughout the hotel starting at 5 p.m. 3 inside the ballroom, 2 monitoring entrances, 1 maintaining perimeter watch. All will be dressed appropriately for the event. Standard protocol. For public appearances where your identity might be revealed. Standard protocol. The phrase would have sounded paranoid to my teenage self, but success at my level required certain precautions. When your cybersecurity firm protects government databases and Fortune 500 intellectual property, when your personal net worth exceeds the GDP of small nations, when your algorithms could theoretically crash financial markets if misused, anonymity becomes both shield and strategy. But Saturday night would end that anonymity, at least within the small universe of Westfield High's class of 2004. The question was whether I was ready for what came next. The office intercom buzzed with a call from my chief technology officer, Daniel Kim, who was overseeing final preparations for Monday's acquisition announcement. The buyer, North Star Defense Systems, would be publicly revealing their purchase of Clark Cybersecurity Solutions within 72 hours. Industry publications were already preparing articles about the mysterious founder who'd built a 9-figure company while maintaining near-complete invisibility. Forbes had been investigating my identity for months, piecing together shell company records and patent filings that painted an incomplete but intriguing picture. Madison, the North Star legal team needs final approval on the press release language. Daniel's voice carried through the speaker. They want to emphasize the innovative nature of your zero-day detection algorithms, without revealing specifics that might compromise ongoing government contracts. Government contracts. The phrase still felt surreal, even after 5 years of working with agencies whose names appeared in movies more often than newspapers. My algorithms had prevented cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, protected election systems from foreign interference, and secured communications for diplomats in hostile territories. All while my high school classmates assumed I was designing websites for local businesses. "Tell them to focus on commercial applications," I replied, making notes on the press release draft. Healthcare data protection, financial institution security, corporate intellectual property safeguards. The government work stays classified, but the principles apply to civilian markets. After ending the call, I returned to the reunion invitation, studying details I'd memorized weeks ago. Saturday night, 7 p.m. to midnight, cocktail attire requested, cash bar with appetizer buffet, dancing until 11 with a DJ playing hits from our graduation decade. The committee had organized memory boards featuring photos from senior year, superlatives voting for most changed and most successful, and a slideshow celebrating classmates' achievements over the past 20 years. Most successful. The category would have been laughable applied to my 18-year-old self. Senior year Madison Clark had been voted most likely to work in tech, which everyone understood as polite code for most likely to remain invisible in a cubicle somewhere. The girl who spent lunch periods in the computer lab, who tutored football. Players in calculus without getting invited to their parties, who graduated valedictorian while remaining virtually unknown to half her graduating class. That girl had been planning something none of them could have imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother, Tyler, who lived in Denver and worked as a mechanical engineer. He was one of the few family members who understood the complete scope of my success, having helped me navigate legal complexities during the company's early years. Still planning to shock the hell out of everyone Saturday night? Mom wants to know if she should prepare for media attention. I smiled, typing back, "Tell her to have her hair done by Thursday. Forbes might want family interviews by next week." The preparation for Saturday had been meticulous, like planning a military operation disguised as a social event. My stylist, Catherine Brooks, had selected a midnight blue Alexander McQueen dress that cost more than most people's cars, but looked elegant rather than flashy. The jewelry would be subtle. Diamond earrings inherited from my grandmother, a vintage, Cartier watch that appeared expensive to those who recognized the brand but didn't scream wealth to casual observers. Hair and makeup would be professional but not overdone. The goal was sophisticated success, not lottery winner excess. Most importantly, the security team had researched every attendee who'd confirmed their attendance. 312, former classmates plus spouses and dates, had RSVP'd for the reunion. Among them were faces I remembered clearly and others I'd completely forgotten. Sarah Martinez had indeed become a successful real estate agent, earning decent money but nothing extraordinary. Kevin Thompson had followed his football scholarship to Arizona State, played professionally for 3 years, then returned to Phoenix as a high school coach. Lisa Chen had become a pediatric nurse, married with 2 children, living the suburban family life that had seemed like the ultimate aspiration to our teenage selves. And then there was Brandon Mitchell. Brandon Mitchell, whose name on the attendee list had made me pause longer than I'd paused for any other. Brandon, who'd been my boyfriend for exactly 4 months during junior year, before deciding I was too weird, too focused on computers, too uninterested in normal teenage social dynamics. Brandon, who'd broken up with me at Jessica Palmer's house party by announcing to anyone within earshot that I was a pathetic loser who would never amount to anything, because I cared more about programming than people. The memory still stung. Not because I'd been heartbroken over losing Brandon. I hadn't been. But because his words had echoed my own deepest fears about social isolation and professional potential. At 17, his casual cruelty had felt like a prophecy. At 38, it felt like motivation. According to the background research, Brandon had become a pharmaceutical sales representative, earning solid middle-class money while maintaining the charm and confidence that had made him popular in high school. He'd married Jessica Palmer, the same girl whose party had hosted our breakup. They lived in a suburban subdivision with their 2 children, posted family vacation photos on Facebook, and seemed to have achieved the exact life trajectory that 17-year-old me had assumed represented success. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. They had no idea what I'd become. The late afternoon sun painted Phoenix in shades of amber and copper as I reviewed the final security protocols for Saturday evening. The helicopter would arrive at Westfield High's football field at precisely 10 p.m. during the reunion's final hour when most attendees would be relaxed from alcohol and nostalgia. The landing would be visible from the ballroom's windows, creating natural curiosity about who was leaving via private aircraft. My exit would be timed for maximum impact with minimal disruption. Jennifer returned with updates from the catering staff at the reunion venue. Standard hotel ballroom setup, round tables for 8, elevated stage for the DJ and guest speakers, open bar in the corner with reunion committee members rotating shifts to manage crowd flow. Everything was perfectly normal for a suburban high school reunion, which made my planned departure even more theatrically appropriate. The security team has identified potential complication factors, Jennifer said, consulting her tablet. Brandon Mitchell has been posting on social media about looking forward to seeing old friends at the reunion. His recent comments suggest he's planning to use the event for networking, possibly to promote his current business ventures. Brandon networking at our high school reunion. The image was so perfectly predictable it felt scripted. Of course he would view the reunion as a business opportunity. Of course he would arrive with charm and confidence intact, ready to reconnect with former classmates who might need pharmaceutical sales services or investment opportunities. Of course he would assume that awkward Madison Clark would still be the same insecure girl he'd dismissed 20 years ago. He was about to learn how wrong assumptions could be. The decision to attend the reunion hadn't been about revenge or proving anything to people whose opinions had ceased to matter decades ago. But as I sat in my corner office, watching Phoenix transform from day to night through windows that overlooked a city I'd helped secure from cyber threats, I realized that some moments in life offered perfect symmetry. The girl who'd been called a pathetic loser for caring about technology had built an empire through that same technology. The teenager who'd been dismissed as socially awkward had learned to navigate business relationships with Fortune 500 executives and government officials. Saturday night would be about more than revelation. It would be about the completion of a story that had been 20 years in the telling. The quiet girl in the computer lab had become the invisible force protecting digital infrastructure across the country. The pathetic loser had become a woman whose algorithms secured the communications of presidents and prime ministers. And at exactly 10 p.m., she would walk out of that reunion toward a helicopter that represented not just wealth, but the freedom that comes from never again needing to hide who you've become. The sun disappeared behind the mountains as I made my final decision about Saturday night. The invitation had been sitting on my desk for 3 months. The preparation had been meticulous. The security was arranged. The helicopter was confirmed. It was time for Madison Clark to stop being invisible. Saturday evening arrived with Arizona's trademark desert sunset painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. I stood in the master bedroom of my Scottsdale estate, a 6,000-square-foot sanctuary nestled against the McDowell Mountains that most of my former classmates didn't know existed. The house had been featured in Architectural Digest 2 years ago, though the article had identified the owner only as a prominent tech entrepreneur who valued privacy above recognition. Catherine Brooks, my stylist, made final adjustments to the midnight blue Alexander McQueen dress while I reviewed security updates on my encrypted tablet. Marcus Rodriguez's team had been in position at the Marriott since 4 p.m., conducting their usual surveillance of entry points and potential complications. Their reports painted a picture of typical reunion attendance, rental cars filled with former classmates arriving in clusters, wives checking makeup in hotel mirrors, husbands adjusting ties they hadn't worn since the last wedding they'd attended. The earrings complement the dress perfectly, Catherine said, stepping back to evaluate her work. Elegant without being ostentatious. You'll look successful but not intimidating. I studied my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror that dominated one wall of the bedroom. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the awkward teenager who'd graduated valedictorian while remaining invisible to her peers. 20 years of yoga and martial arts training had given me posture that commanded attention. Professional success had taught me to carry myself with quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself through volume or aggression. The expensive dress and subtle jewelry suggested prosperity without screaming wealth. But the real transformation wasn't visible in any mirror. That existed in the secure servers housed in climate-controlled facilities across Phoenix, in the government contracts that renewed automatically every 3 years, in the bank accounts that generated more interest daily than most people earned, monthly. The pathetic loser Brandon Mitchell had dismissed at Jessica Palmer's house party had evolved into someone who could crash the NASDAQ with properly applied malicious code, though I'd spent my career protecting financial markets rather than exploiting them. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler in Denver. Mom called. She's nervous about tomorrow's Forbes interview. I think you should have warned her 20 years ago that her daughter was going to be famous." I smiled while fastening the vintage Cartier watch around my wrist. My mother, Patricia Clark, had watched my transformation from shy teenager to reclusive adult with growing concern over the years. She'd known I was successful. The house, the cars, the frequent business travel had made that obvious. But she'd never understood the true scope of what I'd built. The acquisition announcement on Monday would change that, along with changing everything else about my carefully maintained anonymity. The drive to downtown Phoenix took 35 minutes through traffic that seemed unusually heavy for a Saturday evening. My driver, Thomas Chen, had worked for me for 3 years and understood the peculiar requirements of transporting someone whose identity needed protection. He'd signed non-disclosure agreements that rivaled those used by defense contractors, but more importantly, he possessed the discretion that came from understanding that real wealth preferred invisibility to advertisement. "The hotel valet has been briefed about the Bentley," Thomas said, navigating through the Marriott's circular drive. "They'll park it away from the main entrance to avoid unwanted attention." The Bentley Mulsanne was another calculated choice for the evening. Expensive enough to suggest serious success, but understated enough to avoid the flashy excess that might overshadow the evening's more dramatic revelations. Most of my former classmates would recognize it as an expensive car, without immediately understanding that it cost more than their houses. Marcus Rodriguez appeared at the passenger door as Thomas brought the vehicle to a stop, his presence both reassuring and invisible to casual observers. Marcus had been protecting high-profile clients for 15 years before joining my security team, including celebrities and politicians whose names regularly appeared in headlines. His ability to blend into any environment while maintaining constant vigilance had made him invaluable during the increasingly public nature of my business dealings. "The ballroom is at 60% capacity," he murmured as I stepped out of the Bentley. "Brandon Mitchell arrived 20 minutes ago with his wife. He's been working the room, distributing business cards to anyone who will accept them. Sarah, Martinez has been asking other attendees if they've heard anything about your current situation." Current situation. The phrase carried more weight than Sarah could have imagined. My current situation involved protecting the digital infrastructure that kept American society functioning, generating revenue that exceeded the budgets of most government agencies, and preparing to emerge from 20 years of deliberate obscurity into the harsh spotlight that accompanied 9-figure acquisition deals. The hotel lobby buzzed with the nervous energy that preceded all high school reunions. Middle-aged people trying to recapture confidence they'd possessed decades ago. Couples practicing conversations they hoped would impress former classmates, and the universal anxiety about whether time had been kind or cruel to faces and bodies that had once seemed invulnerable to aging. I recognized faces immediately, though names took longer to surface from memory. Kevin Thompson had gained weight but maintained the broad shoulders that had made him formidable on the football field. Lisa Chen looked exactly the same, as if the past 20 years had been a brief intermission rather than 2 full decades of adult life. Jennifer Walsh, a different Jennifer than my assistant, had become the kind of polished suburban mother who organized charity fundraisers and served on PTA committees. But it was Sarah Martinez who spotted me first, her real estate agents trained. I recognizing opportunity, approaching from across the marble lobby. She crossed the space between us with practiced efficiency, her smile calibrated to convey enthusiasm without desperation, the kind of expression that sold houses and closed deals. "Madison Clark," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come. It's been so long since anyone's heard from you." Her greeting carried the subtle interrogation that characterized all reunion conversations. Polite inquiry, designed to extract status information without appearing nosy. Sarah's trained eye was already cataloging details: the dress that looked expensive, the watch that suggested success, the confident posture that hadn't existed in high school. Trying to determine whether I represented potential business opportunity or simple curiosity. "Good to see you, Sarah," I replied, accepting her handshake with the firm grip that had closed deals with Fortune 500 executives. "Congratulations on your real estate success. I've seen your name on billboards around the valley." The compliment was calculated to establish conversational equality while avoiding any revelation about my own professional situation. Sarah's expression brightened at the recognition, confirming that she craved acknowledgement for achievements that had made her successful within conventional parameters. "Thank you. It's been a good run. The Phoenix market has been incredibly strong these past few years." She paused, clearly hoping I would reciprocate with information about my own career. "I remember you were always so good with computers in school. Are you still working in tech?" "Still working in tech." The question was so perfectly innocuous, so completely inadequate to describe my actual professional reality, that I almost laughed. I was the tech that other tech companies hired to protect themselves from cyber warfare. I was the invisible force that prevented foreign governments from accessing American military databases. I was the algorithm that stood between functional society and digital chaos. "I do some consulting work," I said, using the vague description that had served me well for years. "Nothing too exciting." Sarah's disappointment was visible but brief, quickly replaced by the professional recovery that made her effective at managing client expectations. She'd cataloged me as moderately successful, but not worth significant networking investment, exactly the assessment I'd been cultivating for decades. The elevator ride to the ballroom passed in companionable silence with two other former classmates, whose names escaped me, but whose faces triggered vague memories of shared classes and forgotten interactions. They discussed children's college plans and mortgage refinancing with the comfortable authority of people whose lives had followed predictable trajectories: marriage, children, suburban houses, retirement planning discussions that assumed steady but unremarkable financial growth. I listened without contributing, mentally reviewing the security protocols that would govern the evening's events. Marcus and his team were positioned throughout the hotel, monitoring communications and maintaining sightlines to potential exit routes. The helicopter was confirmed for 10 p.m. arrival at Westfield High's football field, 7 minutes from the Marriott by ground transportation. Local air traffic control had approved the flight plan, and hotel management had been discreetly informed about a private event that might generate some noise disturbance around 10 o'clock. The grand ballroom had been transformed into the kind of nostalgic shrine that reunion committees created with photographer backdrops, memory boards featuring senior year photos, and table centerpieces incorporating the school colors that had seemed so important 2 decades ago. A DJ played hits from our graduation era, songs that had soundtracked teenage heartbreak and triumph, now serving as background music for middle-aged conversations about property taxes and college tuition costs. 300 people occupied. Round tables that had been arranged to encourage mingling while maintaining the subtle hierarchies that had defined our high school experience. Former student government members naturally gravitated toward the front tables near the stage. Athletes clustered together, their conversation loud enough to dominate surrounding tables. The academic achievers, my former peers, occupied quieter tables near the back, their discussions focused on professional accomplishments rather than social reconnection. I chose a table that offered strategic positioning, close enough to observe the main social dynamics, distant enough to avoid unwanted attention, with clear sightlines to multiple exit routes that Marcus had identified during his afternoon reconnaissance. The location also provided a perfect vantage point for the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the hotel's courtyard and, beyond that, the direction from which my helicopter would approach. My table mates included faces I recognized but hadn't thought about in 20 years. Angela Reeves, who'd been editor of the school newspaper and now worked as a freelance journalist for local magazines. Roberto Sanchez, former debate team captain who'd become a family law attorney. Michelle Foster, who'd played violin in the orchestra and now taught music at an elementary school in Tempe. Their conversation naturally turned to the universal reunion topics: career updates delivered with carefully modulated pride, children's achievements recounted with parental precision and gentle probing about who had exceeded expectations and who had fallen short of teenage ambitions. I contributed minimal personal information while encouraging others to share their stories, a technique that had served me well in business negotiations where information gathering was more valuable than information sharing. "I always wondered what happened to you after graduation," Angela said during a lull in conversation. "You were so smart, but you just seemed to disappear. No Facebook, no LinkedIn updates, no presence at any of the smaller reunions." Disappeared. The word was more accurate than she realized. I had deliberately disappeared from social visibility while building something that required invisibility for protection. My absence from social media hadn't been antisocial behavior. It had been operational security. My lack of professional publicity hadn't been modest. It had been strategic. "I've always preferred privacy," I said, sipping the wine that had been carefully selected for its moderate alcohol content. "Some of us are naturally more private than others." Roberto nodded approvingly. "Smart approach, especially in today's world. I tell my clients all the time that social media creates more problems than it solves. Better to keep your business private." If only he knew how private my business really was, or how many problems it solved for agencies whose existence most Americans barely acknowledged. But Roberto's supportive comment created social cover for my reticence, validating my apparent reclusiveness as wisdom rather than antisocial behavior. The evening progressed with the predictable rhythm of all reunions. Initial awkwardness giving way to alcohol-lubricated nostalgia. Forgotten grievances temporarily set aside in favor of shared memories, and the gradual revelation of who had achieved success and who had fallen short of teenage expectations. I observed these dynamics with the analytical mindset that had made me effective at pattern recognition in both cybersecurity and human behavior. Sarah Martinez worked the room with professional efficiency, distributing business cards and collecting contact information from anyone who might represent future real estate opportunities. Kevin Thompson held court near the bar, entertaining former teammates with stories that had probably grown more impressive with each telling over the past 20 years. Lisa Chen moved between tables with the social grace that had made her popular in high school and apparently served her well in pediatric nursing. But it was Brandon Mitchell who commanded the most attention, exactly as he'd commanded attention 20 years ago. He'd aged well, maintaining the athletic build and confident smile that had made him attractive to teenage girls, and now seemed to impress their middle-aged versions. His wife, Jessica, stayed close to his side, playing the supportive spouse role with practiced efficiency while he distributed pharmaceutical sales materials to anyone willing to listen. I watched him work the room with the same charm that had once convinced me he was worth dating, the same confidence that had made his eventual rejection so devastating to my 17-year-old self. He moved from table to table with purposeful networking energy, collecting business cards and making connections that might prove valuable for future sales opportunities. He hadn't noticed me yet, though I'd been observing his progress through the ballroom for the past hour. When our eyes finally met across the crowded room, his expression shifted through several phases: recognition, surprise, calculation, and finally dismissive assessment. I could practically see him categorizing me as the same awkward girl he'd rejected in high school, someone who might provide nostalgic conversation but offered no networking value for his current business objectives. His confident smile suggested he viewed me as an easy social victory, someone whose continued awkwardness would reinforce his own sense of having successfully navigated the transition from high school popularity to adult achievement. He had no idea that the quiet girl at the back table had spent 20 years building something that made his pharmaceutical sales territory look like a lemonade stand. At 9:30 p.m., exactly 30 minutes before the helicopter's scheduled arrival, Brandon Mitchell began walking toward my table with the purposeful stride of someone who expected to be welcomed wherever he chose to appear. His approach triggered subtle movements throughout the ballroom, as Marcus Rodriguez's security team adjusted their positions to maintain optimal sightlines and response capabilities. The pathetic loser was about to have her first conversation in 20 years with the boy who'd given her that title. In 30 minutes, she'd be walking toward a helicopter that represented everything he'd assumed she'd never achieve. The reunion was about to become much more interesting. Brandon Mitchell approached my table with the calculated confidence of a pharmaceutical sales representative who'd spent 20 years perfecting his pitch to skeptical doctors. His wife Jessica trailed behind him, her expression carrying the practiced smile of someone accustomed to supporting her husband's networking efforts at social events. The entire ballroom seemed to fade into background noise as he drew closer, though I remained acutely aware of Marcus Rodriguez's team adjusting their positions throughout the room. "Madison Clark," Brandon said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of amused superiority that had once made my teenage heart race and later taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation. "I almost didn't recognize you. You've certainly changed since high school." The pause before changed was deliberate, designed to suggest that any alterations to my appearance were noteworthy, precisely because my teenage self had been so unremarkable. It was the kind of backhanded compliment that pharmaceutical sales training had probably refined, but hadn't invented. Brandon had been using those verbal techniques since junior year. "Hello, Brandon," I replied, rising from my chair with the controlled grace that 20 years of martial arts training had made automatic. "Jessica, good to see you both." Jessica Palmer Mitchell looked exactly as I'd expected. The former head cheerleader who'd maintained her figure through expensive gym memberships and careful attention to fashion trends, though her eyes carried the slightly desperate brightness of someone trying to recapture glory that had peaked at 18. She'd been present the night Brandon had publicly humiliated me, had laughed along with his cruel assessment of my social awkwardness and romantic inadequacy. "Madison," Jessica said, her voice pitched higher than necessary. "We were just talking about you earlier. Brandon mentioned you two used to date." Used to date. The phrase reduced our 4-month relationship to casual history, erasing the nights I'd spent helping him pass calculus, the weekends I'd rearranged my schedule to attend his basketball games, the genuine affection I'd felt before learning that teenage boys often confused intellectual compatibility with romantic convenience. "Briefly," I said, allowing a small smile. "Junior year, if I remember correctly." Brandon's laugh carried the same dismissive quality that had characterized our breakup 20 years ago. "Madison was always so focused on her computer stuff. Used to joke that she cared more about programming than people." Computer stuff. The phrase would have stung at 17, when my passion for technology felt like social suicide in a world that valued athletic achievement and social conformity above intellectual curiosity. At 38, it felt like validation of every choice I'd made since graduation. "Some people find their passion early," I said, accepting a fresh glass of wine from a passing server. "Technology has been good to me." The understatement was so massive it approached comedic territory. Technology hadn't just been good to me. It had made me wealthy beyond anything Brandon's pharmaceutical sales career could achieve, had given me the power to protect national security infrastructure, had earned me the respect of government officials, whose names appeared on currency and in history books. But Brandon interpreted my modest response as confirmation of his assumptions about my continued mediocrity. His expression brightened with the satisfaction of someone whose prejudices had been validated by reality. "That's great," he said, his voice carrying the patronizing enthusiasm typically reserved for children's art projects. "I always thought you'd end up doing something with computers, probably working for some tech company, maybe doing websites or something. The casual dismissal of my professional life revealed more about Brandon's limited imagination than my actual achievements. He'd spent 20 years assuming that awkward Madison Clark had evolved into exactly the kind of unremarkable adult he'd predicted. Technically competent, but socially invisible. Probably earning a decent middle-class income but never achieving anything noteworthy enough to warrant attention or respect. "I do work with technology," I confirmed, sipping my wine while calculating the precise timing required for the evening's ultimate revelation. 22 minutes until the helicopter. Arrived at Westfield High's football field. 15 minutes until Marcus would begin moving the team toward the exit positions. Angela Reeves, my table-mate who'd been quietly observing the interaction, leaned forward with the journalistic instincts that had made her successful in local media. Madison's being modest. I was just telling her that someone with her intelligence probably built something impressive over the years. Angela's intervention was both supportive and strategically timed, creating social pressure for me to reveal more specific information about my professional situation. But it also provided Brandon with an opportunity to demonstrate the verbal cruelty that had remained constant throughout his adult development. "Intelligence is great," Brandon said, his smile never wavering. "But success in the real world requires people skills, networking ability, the kind of social intelligence that makes clients trust you with important decisions. No offense, Madison, but you were always more comfortable with machines than people." More comfortable with machines than people. The assessment carried enough truth to sting, even 20 years later. I had indeed been more comfortable with machines. During high school, had found their logical consistency more appealing than the unpredictable cruelty of teenage social dynamics. But what Brandon failed to understand was that machines had taught me patterns that applied perfectly to human behavior, had given me analytical skills that made me exceptionally effective at reading people's motivations and predicting their actions, including his. "You're absolutely right," I said, setting down my wine glass and folding my hands in my lap. "I've always been better with machines than people. Machines are logical, predictable. When you understand how they work, you can make them do exactly what you need them to do." Brandon's expression shifted slightly, some primitive instinct recognizing that my agreement hadn't carried the defeated tone he'd expected. But his confidence recovered quickly, supported by 20 years of success in pharmaceutical sales that had convinced him he understood human psychology better than the quiet girl who'd once helped him pass math classes.
"Exactly," he said, glancing around the table to ensure his audience was paying attention. "That's why I've done so well in pharmaceutical sales. It's all about understanding people, building relationships, making connections that benefit everyone involved. Madison, you probably make decent money doing technical support or website design, but real success comes from working with people, not hiding behind a computer screen." Technical support, website design, hiding behind a computer screen? Each phrase revealed the limitations of his imagination, the narrow scope of his understanding about what technology could accomplish in the hands of someone who truly understood its potential. Brandon had spent 20 years in a career that required charm and persuasion, but demanded no innovation, no creation, no fundamental understanding of the forces that were reshaping human civilization. Roberto Sanchez, the former debate team captain, cleared his throat diplomatically. "I think we might be making assumptions about Madison's career that aren't necessarily accurate. In my legal practice, I've worked with tech consultants who make more money than most doctors." Roberto's defense was well-intentioned but incomplete. Tech consultants who made more money than most doctors still occupied a recognizable category within Brandon's worldview. He could understand expensive consulting, could imagine technical expertise commanding premium rates, could process the possibility that I had achieved moderate financial success through specialized knowledge. What he couldn't imagine was that the quiet girl from his junior year had become someone whose work protected the digital infrastructure that allowed his pharmaceutical company to process orders, whose algorithms secured the banking systems that managed his mortgage payments, whose cybersecurity protocols prevented foreign governments from accessing the medical databases that contained his family's health information. "I'm sure Madison's done fine for herself," Brandon said, his tone carrying the dismissive generosity of someone offering praise to a subordinate. But let's be realistic about what tech consulting means in the real world. It's probably troubleshooting computer problems for small businesses, maybe designing websites for local companies. Decent work, but hardly the kind of thing that changes the world. Hardly the kind of thing that changes the world. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge, an invitation to reveal information that would shatter every assumption he'd maintained about my capabilities and achievements. I glanced at my watch, the vintage Cartier that cost more than his annual pharmaceutical sales commission, and noted that 18 minutes remained until the helicopter's arrival.
"You're right again," I said, reaching for my purse and retrieving my phone. My work isn't the kind that changes the world. It's more behind the scenes, keeping things running smoothly so other people can focus on their important business. The phone in my hand wasn't the consumer device that everyone else carried. It was a specially encrypted military-grade communications system that connected me directly to national security agencies, defense contractors, and government officials whose phone numbers weren't listed in any public directory. But to casual observers, it looked like an expensive but unremarkable smartphone. Brandon's confidence soared at my continued modesty. Exactly. There's nothing wrong with being support staff. The world needs people who can fix computers and maintain websites. It's honest work. Support staff. The characterization was so perfectly, devastatingly wrong that I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for how completely he'd misunderstood the nature of modern power. Brandon still thought in terms of traditional hierarchies, where influence required visibility, where importance demanded recognition, where real success meant being known by people who mattered. He had no conception of invisible influence, of the kind of power that operated through anonymity rather than publicity. He'd never considered that the most important people in modern society might be the ones whose names never appeared in newspapers, whose work remained classified, whose influence over daily life exceeded that of politicians and celebrities precisely because it remained unrecognized. Michelle Foster, who'd been quietly listening while grading papers from her elementary school teaching job, looked up from her work with the patient expression of someone accustomed to managing children's social conflicts. I think we're all being a bit presumptuous about each other's careers. Madison, would you like to tell us what you actually do? The question created a perfect opportunity for revelation, but timing remained crucial. 16 minutes until helicopter arrival. The ballroom was at peak social energy with alcohol and nostalgia combining to create the kind of emotional intensity that would make dramatic announcements particularly memorable. "I work in cybersecurity," I said, the simple truth carrying more weight than Brandon could possibly understand. "I help organizations protect their digital infrastructure from various types of threats." Cybersecurity. The word was specific enough to suggest expertise, but vague enough to avoid revealing the true scope of my professional responsibilities. Most people understood cybersecurity as a legitimate technical field, without comprehending the difference between corporate IT protection and the kind of advanced algorithmic defense systems that prevented cyber warfare against critical national infrastructure. Brandon's expression brightened with renewed confidence. "See, that's exactly what I figured. Corporate IT security, probably for some mid-sized company here in Phoenix. Good, steady work, but definitely support staff level." Corporate IT security for some mid-sized company. The assessment was so spectacularly inaccurate that I had to concentrate on maintaining my composed expression. Clark's cybersecurity solutions employed more people than most mid-sized companies, generated more annual revenue than the GDP of some nations, and maintained contracts with agencies whose budgets exceeded those of entire state governments. Something like that, I agreed, checking my phone for updated timing information. 14 minutes until helicopter arrival. Marcus Rodriguez had sent a discreet text confirming that all team members were in position for the evening's concluding events. Jessica Palmer Mitchell, who'd been quietly observing our exchange while apparently calculating social dynamics, leaned forward with the kind of artificial enthusiasm that characterized former cheerleaders attempting to maintain group harmony. "Well,
I think it's wonderful that everyone's found their place in life, she said, her voice carrying the bright emptiness of someone avoiding uncomfortable truths. Brandon and I have been so blessed with his pharmaceutical career, the company car, the expense account, the annual sales trips to destinations like Las Vegas and Orlando. Company car, expense account, sales trips to Las Vegas and Orlando. The benefits she described with such pride represented the kind of middle management perks that major corporations offered to keep talented employees satisfied without granting them any real power or independence. They were golden handcuffs disguised as symbols of achievement. But Jessica's attempt to redirect conversation towards safer territory was interrupted by Sarah Martinez, who appeared at our table with the inevitable business card and professional smile that had made her successful in Phoenix real estate. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Sarah said, though her timing suggested she'd been monitoring our conversation from across the room. "Madison, I wanted to follow up on our earlier chat. If you're working in cybersecurity, you probably have clients who need commercial real estate services. I'd love to discuss potential referral opportunities." Referral opportunities. Sarah had identified me as someone whose professional connections might generate business, though her understanding of those connections was as limited as Brandon's assessment of my career significance. She imagined I knew small business owners who might need office space, entrepreneurs who might require warehouse facilities, mid-level executives who might purchase commercial properties. She couldn't imagine that my clients included Fortune 500 companies whose real estate portfolios exceeded her annual sales volume, government agencies whose facility requirements were classified, and defense contractors whose property needs were managed through specialized channels that required security clearances she'd never heard of.
"That's very thoughtful," I said, accepting her business card with the diplomatic courtesy that had served me well in countless professional interactions. "I'll keep your services in mind if opportunities arise." My phone buzzed with another update from Marcus. 12 minutes until helicopter arrival. Time to begin the evening's transition from social pleasantries to dramatic revelation. "Actually," I said, rising from my chair and smoothing my Alexander McQueen dress, "I should probably start saying my goodbyes. I have transportation arrangements that require precise timing." Transportation arrangements. The phrase was deliberately mysterious, designed to create curiosity without revealing specific details. Brandon's expression suggested he interpreted this as typical Madison Clark awkwardness, probably an early departure to avoid extended social interaction with people whose confidence made her uncomfortable. He had no idea that my transportation arrangements involved a private helicopter that cost more per hour to operate than he earned per month, piloted by a former military aviator whose security clearance exceeded that of most government officials, arriving at precisely 10 p.m. to collect the pathetic loser who'd apparently never amounted to anything. The counterattack had begun, though Brandon didn't realize it yet. Brandon's confidence reached its peak as I prepared to leave, his expression carrying the satisfied smugness of someone who believed he'd successfully categorized an old acquaintance according to his predetermined expectations. He glanced around the table, seeking validation from our former classmates who'd witnessed his systematic dismissal of my professional achievements. "Well, it was great catching up, Madison," he said, extending his hand for what he clearly expected to be a final farewell handshake. "Maybe we'll see you at the 30-year reunion. Hopefully by then, you'll have worked your way up from technical support to something more substantial." Technical support to something more substantial. The phrase crystallized everything that was about to change in Brandon Mitchell's understanding of success, achievement, and the dangerous assumptions people make when they mistake visibility for importance. His pharmaceutical sales career had taught him to evaluate people through conventional metrics: job titles, company names, obvious symbols of prosperity that could be quickly cataloged and ranked. He'd never learned to recognize the kind of power that preferred anonymity, the type of influence that operated through classified channels, or the form of success that measured impact rather than recognition. In 8 minutes, when my helicopter appeared over the hotel courtyard,
Brandon would begin learning lessons about modern achievement that his 20-year sales career hadn't prepared him to understand. "Madison," he said, his voice carrying a tentative quality that hadn't been present since high school. "When you say some aspects of your work require clearance, what level of clearance are we discussing?" What level of clearance? Brandon's question demonstrated a more sophisticated understanding of government classification systems than I'd expected, suggesting either research skills or professional exposure to federal contracting procedures that extended beyond pharmaceutical sales territories. "Top secret with additional compartmentalized access," I replied, providing specific information that would be meaningless to most civilians but would clearly communicate the scope of my government involvement to anyone familiar with classification levels. "Top secret with compartmentalized access." The phrase created immediate silence around our table as everyone processed information that completely redefined their understanding of my professional reality. Top secret clearance was difficult to obtain and expensive to maintain, indicating extensive government trust and ongoing project involvement. Compartmentalized access suggested work on projects so sensitive that even cleared personnel were restricted to specific information areas. Roberto Sanchez leaned back in his chair, his legal training helping him recognize the significance of what he'd just heard. "Madison, top secret with compartmentalized access isn't something you get for routine IT consulting. That's the kind of clearance reserved for people working on national security projects." National security projects. Roberto's assessment was accurate but incomplete. My clearance levels granted access to information that affected international relations, domestic infrastructure protection, and cyber warfare defense systems that most government officials never saw. The pathetic loser who'd never amount to anything had spent 20 years protecting the digital systems that kept American civilization functioning. My phone displayed the final countdown message. "Helicopter arriving in 60 seconds. Time to move." I stood, smoothing my Alexander McQueen dress and gathering my purse, with movements that had become automatic through countless high-level business meetings and government briefings. "I'm afraid I need to leave now. My transportation schedule is quite specific." Transportation schedule, the phrase was about to become dramatically clear as the sound of rotor blades began approaching the hotel from the direction of Scottsdale Airport, growing louder with each passing second as my Augusta Westland helicopter appeared in the night sky above Phoenix's downtown corridor. "Thank you for the career advice," I said, accepting his handshake with the controlled pressure that had closed deals with defense contractors and government officials. "I'll certainly consider your suggestions." My phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Marcus Rodriguez. "Helicopter ETA 7 minutes. Hotel security has been discreetly informed about noise disturbance. A local news affiliate received an anonymous tip about a mystery departure from a reunion event. Recommend beginning movement toward exit positions." Local news. The detail hadn't been part of my original planning, but Marcus's strategic thinking had always exceeded my expectations. A news crew capturing footage of my helicopter departure would ensure that tonight's revelation extended beyond the limited audience of Westfield High's class of 2004. By tomorrow morning, the story would be circulating through Phoenix media markets, creating publicity that would make Monday's acquisition announcement even more impactful. Roberto Sanchez, who'd been observing our exchange with the analytical skills that had made him successful in family law practice, stood as I prepared to leave. "Madison, it's been a pleasure talking with you tonight. If you ever need legal services for your consulting business, please don't hesitate to call." Legal services for my consulting business. Roberto's offer was professionally appropriate, but spectacularly inadequate to address the kind of legal complexities that governed my actual business operations. Clark Cybersecurity Solutions retained law firms that specialized in government contracting, international trade regulations, and intellectual property protection for classified technologies. Our legal needs required attorneys with security clearances and experience in federal contract law that extended far beyond Roberto's family practice expertise. "I appreciate the offer," I replied, gathering my purse and checking the time on my Cartier watch.
My current legal situation is fairly specialized, but I'll keep your information on file. Current legal situation. The phrase was technically accurate, but misleadingly modest. My current legal situation involved ongoing negotiations with 3 Fortune 500 companies interested in licensing my cybersecurity algorithms, pending government contracts worth more than the GDP of small nations, and intellectual property portfolios that required constant protection from industrial espionage attempts by foreign competitors. Angela Reeves looked up from her notepad, where she'd been discreetly taking notes throughout our conversation, with the instinctive behavior of someone who'd spent decades in journalism. Madison, before you go, could I ask what company you work for? I'm always interested in local success stories for the magazine features I write.
Local success stories. Angela's question created the perfect opportunity to begin revealing information that would shatter every assumption Brandon had expressed over the past 30 minutes. Clark Cybersecurity Solutions was indeed a local company, founded and headquartered in Phoenix, but its influence extended into classified government facilities and international corporate boardrooms that never appeared in local magazine features. Clark Cybersecurity Solutions, I said, watching for recognition that I knew wouldn't come. The company name appeared in government directories and defense contractor databases, but we'd spent 20 years avoiding publicity that might compromise operational security or client confidentiality. Angela's expression remained politely blank, confirming that my company's deliberate invisibility had been successful. I don't think I've heard of them. Are they a local firm? We are, I confirmed, noticing Brandon's renewed interest in a conversation he'd been preparing to dismiss. Something about my confident tone when discussing my employer had triggered his pharmaceutical sales instincts, suggesting potential networking opportunities he hadn't previously recognized. Clark Cybersecurity, Brandon repeated, his voice carrying the calculating enthusiasm of someone recalibrating social dynamics based on new information. That sounds like a much bigger operation than I was thinking. Are you in management there or still doing technical work? Management or technical work? Brandon's question revealed his continued inability to imagine possibilities outside conventional corporate hierarchies. He could conceive of me holding a management position within someone else's company, could understand the possibility that I'd been promoted beyond technical support roles, but he couldn't envision ownership, leadership, or the kind of entrepreneurial success that created companies rather than simply working within them. I handle strategic development, I said, using the deliberately vague title that appeared on my business cards and government security clearance documentation. Strategic development could mean anything, from middle management to executive leadership, allowing people to interpret my role according to their own expectations and limitations. Jessica Palmer-Mitchell leaned forward with renewed interest. Her cheerleader's social intelligence recognized subtle shifts in conversational power dynamics. 20 years of marriage to a pharmaceutical sales representative had taught her to identify potential business connections that might benefit her husband's career advancement. Strategic development sounds important, she said, her voice carrying the carefully modulated enthusiasm that once made her effective at generating school spirit. Brandon, didn't you mention that your company is always looking for cybersecurity consultants? Brandon's expression shifted as he processed this unexpected development.
His pharmaceutical company did indeed require cybersecurity services, like every major corporation operating in the digital age. If Madison Clark worked for a legitimate cybersecurity firm in a strategic development role, she might represent the kind of professional connection that could advance his sales career through internal networking and executive relationship building. We do work with cybersecurity firms, he admitted, his dismissive attitude rapidly transforming into calculated interest. Madison, maybe we should exchange business cards. There might be opportunities for our companies to work together. Business cards. The suggestion represented a complete reversal from his earlier assessment of my professional irrelevance. 20 minutes ago, he'd been lecturing me about the limitations of technical support careers. Now he was proposing potential business collaboration based on the possibility that I held a position worthy of his networking attention. My phone buzzed again. 5 minutes until helicopter arrival. Time to accelerate the evening's revelations before making my dramatic exit. I'd be happy to discuss potential collaboration, I said, reaching into my purse and retrieving a business card that had been specially designed for occasions requiring maximum impact with minimal information. The card was printed on heavy cotton paper with raised lettering that suggested expensive production values. The logo was elegant but understated. My title appeared as Strategic Development Director beneath my name. But it was the contact information that would prove most revealing to anyone who understood government contracting procedures. The phone number began with a prefix reserved for secure government communications. The email address ended with a domain extension used exclusively for defense contractors with classified project clearances. The physical address corresponded to a building complex that housed only companies with the highest levels of security certification. Brandon accepted the card with the automatic enthusiasm of a pharmaceutical sales representative receiving potential client information. But his expression changed as he processed details that didn't align with his expectations about mid-level corporate cybersecurity consultants. "This address," he said, studying the card with growing confusion, "isn't this the same building complex where Lockheed Martin has their classified projects division?" Lockheed Martin Classified Projects Division. Brandon's recognition of the address suggested more awareness of Phoenix's defense contracting landscape than I'd expected from a pharmaceutical sales representative. Most civilians wouldn't have known which companies occupied the secure facilities along the North Black Canyon Highway corridor. "We share the building with several other technology firms," I confirmed, technically accurate but deliberately incomplete. Clark Cybersecurity Solutions didn't just share the building with defense contractors. We maintained the digital security systems that protected their classified research, secured their communications with government agencies, and prevented foreign intelligence services from accessing their proprietary technologies.
Angela Reeves looked up from the business card she'd been examining, her journalistic instincts clearly activated by details that suggested a much larger story than local cybersecurity consulting. "Madison, this phone number has a government contractor prefix. Are you working on federal projects?" Federal projects. Angela's question pushed our conversation into territory that required careful navigation between truthful disclosure and operational security requirements. My work with federal agencies was documented in public contracting databases, but the specific nature of those projects remained classified at levels that prohibited detailed discussion. "We do some government consulting work," I said, using the euphemistic language that characterized all public discussions of classified project involvement. "Nothing I can discuss in detail, but it's been professionally rewarding." Government consulting work that couldn't be discussed in detail. The phrase carried implications that were beginning to register with everyone at the table, though their interpretations of those implications varied dramatically based on their understanding of how classified government contracting actually operated. Michelle Foster, who'd been quietly grading papers while listening to our conversation, looked up with the kind of focused attention that elementary school teachers developed when something genuinely surprising occurred in their environment. "Madison, when you say government consulting work that can't be discussed, are we talking about the kind of classified projects that require security clearances?" she asked, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone who understood the significance of what she was asking. Security clearances. Michelle's question moved our conversation from general professional topics to specific government access requirements that most civilians never encountered. Obtaining security clearances required extensive background investigations, financial disclosure requirements, and ongoing monitoring that extended far beyond normal employment procedures. "Some aspects of my work required clearance," I confirmed, noting that my phone showed 3 minutes until helicopter arrival. Marcus Rodriguez had sent another encrypted update confirming that all team members were in position for the evening's concluding events.
Brandon's expression had transformed completely during the past few minutes. His pharmaceutical sales confidence replaced by growing recognition that he'd fundamentally misunderstood both my professional situation and the implications of our conversation. His earlier dismissive comments about technical support and website design now seemed embarrassingly inappropriate given the emerging evidence of government contractor involvement and classified project access.
Brandon Mitchell was about to learn exactly how wrong his assumptions had been about the pathetic loser who'd supposedly never amounted to anything worth his attention or respect. The sound began as a distant humming that most people in the grand ballroom initially dismissed as hotel machinery or traffic noise from the street below, but the volume increased steadily, accompanied by a rhythmic beating that anyone who'd served in the military or worked near airports would immediately recognize as rotor blades cutting through desert air at low altitude. Brandon Mitchell's face went through a series of expressions as he processed the implications of my business card, the security clearance revelations, and now the approaching helicopter that seemed to be heading directly toward our location. His pharmaceutical sales training had taught him to read social situations and adjust his approach accordingly, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the possibility that the awkward girl he'd dismissed in high school might require private aircraft for routine transportation. "Is that," he began, then stopped as the noise became too loud for normal conversation. The entire ballroom fell silent as 300 former classmates turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the hotel's courtyard and the surrounding downtown Phoenix landscape. The Augusta Westland AW109 appeared through the darkness like something from a movie, its navigation lights creating geometric patterns against the night sky as it approached the hotel with precision that suggested professional military piloting. "Ladies and gentlemen," the reunion DJ announced over the sound system, his voice carrying the bewildered enthusiasm of someone trying to maintain professional composure during unprecedented circumstances. "It appears we have some unusual air traffic this evening. Please remain calm while we determine what's happening." I remained seated, checking my encrypted phone for final coordination messages from Marcus Rodriguez's security team. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan, though the reactions around me exceeded my most optimistic expectations for dramatic impact. Former classmates pressed against the windows, trying to identify the aircraft's destination and purpose. Cell phones appeared throughout the ballroom as people began recording video footage of what they assumed was an emergency landing or law enforcement operation. Sarah Martinez appeared at my table with the rapid efficiency of a real estate agent who'd recognized a significant development in her professional environment. "Madison, do you know anything about this helicopter situation? I've never seen aircraft this close to downtown hotels." The helicopter was now hovering approximately 200 feet above the hotel courtyard, its powerful spotlights illuminating the area where Marcus Rodriguez's ground team had been discreetly positioning themselves for the past 10 minutes. The pilot's voice crackled through emergency frequencies that were automatically broadcast through the hotel's communication system.
Phoenix Ground Control, this is November 7 Charlie Whiskey requesting permission to proceed to the designated landing zone. Passenger pickup scheduled for 2200 hours, authorized by previous coordination with hotel management and local air traffic control. Passenger pickup. The phrase created immediate speculation throughout the ballroom as former classmates tried to identify which reunion attendee might require helicopter transportation. Theories ranged from medical emergencies to celebrity appearance to witness protection program involvement. Brandon Mitchell had gone completely pale, his confident pharmaceutical sales persona replaced by someone trying to reconcile contradictory information that didn't fit any framework his 20-year career had provided. He stared at my business card, as if the heavy cotton paper might reveal additional secrets through careful examination. "Madison," he said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter noise. "That pilot said passenger pickup. Is that helicopter here for you?" The question hung in the air like incense, visible to everyone at our table and several surrounding tables, where former classmates had been monitoring our conversation with growing interest. Angela Reeves had stopped taking notes and was staring at me with the focused attention of a journalist who'd stumbled onto a much larger story than expected. "My transportation arrangements are fairly specific," I replied, gathering my purse and standing with the controlled grace that had become automatic through countless high-level business meetings. "I prefer to maintain reliable schedules." Reliable schedules that required private helicopter transportation. The understatement was so massive it approached the realm of performance art, but my former classmates' reactions suggested they were beginning to understand that their assumptions about my professional situation might have been spectacularly inaccurate. Marcus Rodriguez appeared at my elbow with the silent efficiency that had made him invaluable during government briefings and classified project meetings. His presence confirmed what the helicopter's arrival had suggested. This wasn't spontaneous drama, but carefully orchestrated revelation designed for maximum impact. "Ma'am, the aircraft is ready for departure. Ground transportation to the landing zone is standing by outside the hotel's main entrance." "Ma'am." The formal address combined with Marcus's obvious security professional appearance created additional layers of confusion for observers who were trying to understand why the quiet girl from their high school class apparently required both private aircraft and personal protection services. Jessica Palmer Mitchell had been silent throughout the past few minutes, but her cheerleader's social intelligence finally processed the full scope of what she was witnessing. "Brandon," she whispered, her voice carrying the horrified recognition of someone who'd realized her husband had made catastrophic social miscalculations. "I think we might have misunderstood Madison's situation."
Misunderstood was an understatement that would become legendary within their marriage, assuming their marriage survived Brandon's systematic humiliation of someone who could apparently afford private helicopters for routine evening transportation. Jessica's dawning awareness of their mistake was written across her face in expressions that cycled between embarrassment, fear, and calculation of potential social consequences. The helicopter had moved into position above Westfield High School's football field, 7 minutes away by ground transportation. Its powerful lights illuminated the field where Brandon had once scored touchdowns that seemed monumentally important to teenage observers. Tonight, that same field would serve as a departure point for the girl he'd dismissed as socially awkward and professionally irrelevant. Roberto Sanchez stood as I prepared to leave, his legal training helping him recognize the significance of what he'd witnessed. "Madison, before you go, I have to ask, when you said you work in cybersecurity, were you being deliberately modest about the scope of your operations?" Deliberately modest. Roberto's question cut to the heart of the evening's revelations. I had indeed been deliberately modest, using vague descriptions and understated language to conceal the true nature of my professional achievements. But modesty had been a strategy rather than insecurity, protection rather than self-deprecation. "I prefer privacy in professional matters," I said, accepting handshakes from former classmates who were still processing information that completely redefined their understanding of success, achievement, and the dangerous assumptions people make about others' potential. Some industries require discretion. The phrase was technically accurate, but didn't begin to capture the complexity of operating cybersecurity systems that protected national infrastructure, financial markets, and government communications from foreign interference. My work required discretion because discussing it in detail could compromise national security and violate federal laws governing classified information sharing. Angela Reeves finally recovered her journalistic composure enough to ask the question that had been building throughout our conversation. "Madison, I have to ask directly, are you the owner of Clark Cybersecurity Solutions?" Owner. The word carried implications that none of them had considered during their earlier assessments of my career trajectory. Corporate ownership meant risk-taking, leadership, and entrepreneurial success that extended far beyond employee salaries or consulting fees. It meant building something from nothing, creating jobs for others, generating wealth through innovation rather than simply trading time for money. I am, I confirmed, noting that my phone showed 30 seconds until Marcus would begin moving us toward the exit. The helicopter's noise was creating perfect cover for our departure, drawing attention away from the ballroom's entrance while every former classmate pressed against windows, trying to understand the evening's extraordinary developments. Brandon Mitchell's pharmaceutical sales confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by someone who was beginning to comprehend the magnitude of his miscalculations. The quiet girl he'd dismissed as a pathetic loser had built a company that required private helicopters, security teams, and government clearances that exceeded those of most federal employees. "Madison," he said, his voice carrying the desperate quality of someone trying to recover from catastrophic social error, "I think I may have misunderstood your professional situation earlier. If I said anything inappropriate..." Inappropriate. The word was spectacularly inadequate to describe his systematic dismissal of my achievements, his condescending lecture about the limitations of technical careers, and his confident prediction that I'd probably worked my way up from technical support to something more substantial by the 30-year reunion. "No harm done," I replied, though we both understood that significant harm had indeed been done to his reputation among former classmates who'd witnessed his casual cruelty towards someone whose success exceeded anything he'd achieved in pharmaceutical sales. We all make assumptions based on limited information. Limited information. Brandon had indeed made assumptions, but they'd been based on prejudice rather than information, on his need to maintain superiority rather than genuine curiosity about others' achievements. He'd spent 20 years assuming that his high school assessment of my social awkwardness accurately predicted my adult potential. Marcus Rodriguez cleared his throat discreetly, indicating that departure timing had become critical. The helicopter was maintaining position above the football field, but aviation regulations limited the duration of hovering operations in urban areas. Coordination with air traffic control required precise adherence to filed flight plans. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the growing crowd of former classmates who'd gathered around our table as word spread throughout the ballroom about the helicopter's apparent connection to my departure, "it's been wonderful seeing everyone tonight." The understatement drew nervous laughter from people who were still processing the evening's revelations. Wonderful didn't begin to describe the complexity of emotions that had characterized my first social interaction with high school classmates in 20 years, or the dramatic revelation of professional success that none of them had anticipated.
Michelle Foster, who'd been quietly observing throughout the evening with elementary teacher patience, stepped forward with the kind of direct question that characterized her professional interactions with confused children. "Madison, just so we're clear, that helicopter outside is your transportation home?" Transportation home. The phrase was technically accurate, but didn't capture the full scope of what the helicopter represented. It was transportation, but it was also symbol, statement, and conclusion to a story that had begun with teenage humiliation and ended with adult vindication. "Among other things," I replied, noting that Marcus had moved to a position near the ballroom's exit where he could monitor both our departure route and potential crowd control issues. 300 former classmates trying to process unprecedented drama could create security complications that required professional management. The helicopter's engines increased in intensity, signaling pilot preparation for passenger pickup procedures. Through the ballroom windows, we could see ground vehicles moving toward the football field where landing lights had been positioned for optimal safety during night operations. Brandon Mitchell made one final attempt to recover from his evening of spectacular miscalculation. "Madison, I want to apologize for any comments I made earlier that might have seemed dismissive. I clearly didn't understand the scope of your professional achievements." Scope of professional achievements. Brandon's apology was appropriate, but incomplete. He'd apologized for seeming dismissive when he'd actually been cruel, for misunderstanding my achievements when he'd dismissed my potential entirely.
His pharmaceutical sales training had taught him to recover from client rejection, but nothing had prepared him to discover that the person he'd rejected possessed resources that exceeded his comprehension. "Apology accepted," I said, extending my hand for a farewell handshake that felt like closing a chapter of life I'd spent 20 years trying to write properly. "I hope your pharmaceutical career continues to be successful." Continues to be successful. The phrase carried multiple layers of meaning that Brandon would probably spend months analyzing. I knew about his career trajectory, his income level, his professional limitations, and the middle management ceiling that constrained his advancement potential. My hope for his continued success was both genuine courtesy and subtle acknowledgement of the vast difference in our respective achievements. As Marcus Rodriguez escorted me toward the ballroom exit, the sound of 300 cell phones capturing video footage created a digital symphony that would ensure tonight's events were preserved for posterity. By tomorrow morning, footage of my helicopter departure would be circulating through social media networks, local news broadcasts, and industry publications that specialized in profiling successful entrepreneurs who'd maintained unusual privacy throughout their careers.
The pathetic loser who'd supposedly never amount to anything was walking toward a helicopter that represented everything Brandon Mitchell had assumed she'd never achieve. 20 years of careful planning, disciplined execution, and strategic invisibility culminated in a revelation that would reshape every assumption her former classmates had maintained about success, achievement, and the dangerous habit of underestimating others. The helicopter's rotor wash was already beginning to affect the hotel's landscaping as we approached the final phase of the evening's dramatic conclusion. The walk from the grand ballroom to the hotel's main entrance felt like crossing a threshold between two different versions of reality. Behind us, 300 former classmates pressed against floor-to-ceiling windows, their cell phones creating a constellation of recording devices that would preserve this moment in digital permanence. Ahead of us, Marcus Rodriguez's security team maintained professional formation while managing crowd control that had become necessary as hotel guests and downtown pedestrians gathered to observe the unusual helicopter activity. The hotel lobby buzzed with confused energy as guests tried to understand why military-grade aircraft was hovering over downtown Phoenix on a Saturday evening. Hotel management moved through the crowd with practiced diplomacy, explaining that they'd been informed of a private transportation event, but offering no details that might compromise security protocols or guest privacy. Thomas Chen waited beside the Bentley Mulsanne with engine running and rear door open, his expression carrying the professional calm that had made him invaluable during countless high-level business meetings and government briefings. 3 years of driving for someone whose identity required protection had taught him to expect unusual circumstances, but even Thomas seemed impressed by the scale of tonight's orchestrated revelation. "Ma'am," he said, holding the door as Marcus Rodriguez conducted final security sweeps of our departure route, "the helicopter pilot reports optimal conditions for landing. The ground crew is standing by at the football field with all necessary safety equipment." The 7-minute drive to Westfield High School passed through downtown Phoenix streets that held 20 years of memories, though most of those memories had been carefully buried beneath decades of professional focus and deliberate privacy. Past the coffee shop where I'd spent countless hours during college writing code that would eventually become the foundation of my cybersecurity algorithms, past the community college campus where I'd taken night classes in business administration while working full-time as a junior programmer for a defense contractor that had since been absorbed into larger corporate structures. But it was the approach to Westfield High School that triggered the most complex emotional response. The building looked smaller than teenage memory had preserved, its brick facade weathered by 20 Arizona summers, but still carrying the institutional authority that had once seemed so overwhelming to my 17-year-old self. The football field where Brandon Mitchell had once scored touchdowns now served as a landing zone for my private helicopter, a transformation that felt both poetic and inevitable.
The Augusta Westland AW-109 sat on the 50-yard line like a mechanical predator, its navigation lights creating geometric patterns against the desert sky, while rotor blades maintained slow rotation in preparation for immediate departure. Ground crew members positioned safety equipment and maintained communication with air traffic control through encrypted channels that required specialized clearances to access. But it was the crowd gathering beyond the chain-link fence that surrounded the school property that suggested tonight's events had achieved impact beyond my original intentions. Word had spread through social media networks with the viral velocity that characterized modern information distribution. Local news crews had arrived with broadcast equipment, though school security and Marcus Rodriguez's team maintained perimeter control that prevented unauthorized access to the landing area. My encrypted phone buzzed with messages from Jennifer Walsh, my assistant, who'd been monitoring media coverage from her home office. Phoenix ABC affiliate running breaking news story about mystery helicopter departure from high school reunion. A Forbes reporter called requesting comment about Monday's acquisition announcement. Wall Street Journal wants an exclusive interview about cybersecurity industry consolidation. Media attention had been inevitable once Monday's acquisition announcement became public, but tonight's dramatic revelation had accelerated the timeline by 72 hours. The invisible cybersecurity entrepreneur, who'd spent 20 years avoiding publicity, was about to become the subject of business magazines, industry publications, and local news features that would reshape public understanding of Phoenix's technology landscape. Marcus Rodriguez opened the Bentley's door and conducted final security protocols before we approached the helicopter. Ma'am, the pilot has confirmed clearance for immediate departure. Flight time to your residence is estimated at 12 minutes. Media personnel are being maintained at a safe distance, but we should expect aerial photography during takeoff and transit. Aerial photography that would appear in tomorrow's newspapers alongside articles about the mysterious defense contractor whose company had been quietly protecting government infrastructure while maintaining near-complete invisibility. The pathetic loser who'd never amount to anything was about to become a case study in entrepreneurial success and strategic privacy management. The walk across Westfield High's football field felt like completing a circle that had been 20 years in the making. Each step toward the helicopter carried symbolic weight that extended far beyond simple transportation logistics. The field where I'd once sat alone in the bleachers reading programming manuals while other students socialized now hosted my departure via private aircraft toward a lifestyle that none of my teenage peers could have imagined. Captain James Morrison, my pilot, appeared at the aircraft door with the military bearing that had made him legendary during his years flying special operations missions for agencies whose names appeared in movies more often than newspapers. His transition to private aviation had occurred 2 years ago, when my business success had reached levels that required specialized transportation security. "Good evening, Miss Clark," he said, his voice carrying easily over the helicopter noise through specialized communication equipment. "Flight conditions are optimal. We've been cleared for direct route to your residence with minimal air traffic complications." The helicopter's interior represented mobile luxury that most corporate executives never experienced, but the real significance lay in the technology that wasn't visible to casual observers. Communication systems that linked directly to government emergency networks, navigation equipment that operated through classified satellite channels, security features that could defeat electronic surveillance attempts by hostile foreign intelligence services. As Captain Morrison initiated takeoff procedures, I looked through the aircraft windows at the crowd that had gathered around Westfield High School's perimeter. Former classmates who'd followed our departure route were visible among hotel guests, local residents, and media personnel who'd responded to social media reports about the unusual evening's events. Cell phone cameras created points of light throughout the crowd as people recorded footage that would circulate through digital networks before we reached cruising altitude. But it was the sight of Brandon Mitchell standing beside the chain-link fence that provided the evening's final dramatic punctuation. Even from helicopter altitude, his body language conveyed the defeated posture of someone processing the complete collapse of his assumptions about success, achievement, and the dangerous habit of underestimating others based on limited teenage observations.
Jessica Palmer Mitchell stood beside him, her expression visible even from our ascending altitude, as someone calculating the social consequences of her husband's systematic humiliation of a former classmate whose resources exceeded their comprehension. 20 years of marriage to a pharmaceutical sales representative had not prepared her for discovering that the quiet girl from their high school class could afford private helicopters for routine evening transportation. My encrypted phone displayed updates from media monitoring services that tracked coverage of my business activities. Local television stations had interrupted regular programming to report on the mystery helicopter departure from a downtown hotel reunion event. Social media networks buzzed with speculation about the identity of the anonymous tech entrepreneur who apparently required military-grade aircraft for personal transportation. But the most significant development came from Jennifer Walsh's message about Forbes magazine. Lead business reporter has confirmed Monday acquisition story will feature prominent coverage of your emergence from 20-year privacy period, requesting exclusive interviews about building a 9-figure company while maintaining complete anonymity.
9-figure company. The phrase would soon replace every assumption Brandon Mitchell had expressed about technical support careers and website design limitations. By Monday morning, industry publications would be analyzing Clark Cybersecurity Solutions as a case study in strategic business development and government contracting success that had occurred entirely outside public awareness. The flight to my Scottsdale estate took exactly 12 minutes through airspace that required specialized clearances to access. Below us, Phoenix sprawled in organized patterns of light that represented the digital infrastructure I'd spent 20 years protecting from cyber warfare, foreign interference, and criminal exploitation. The city's financial networks, communication systems, and government databases operated safely because of algorithms I'd developed in the same computer lab where Brandon Mitchell had once dismissed my technical interests as social inadequacy. Captain Morrison's voice came through the aircraft communication system as we approached landing. Ms. Clark, local news helicopters are maintaining respectful distance, but we should expect continued media attention over the next several days. I've coordinated with your ground security team for enhanced privacy protection during the transition period. Enhanced privacy protection would be necessary as my 20-year anonymity period ended and business success that had operated through classified channels became subject to public scrutiny. The acquisition announcement would trigger industry analysis, government contractor profiles, and entrepreneurial success stories that would reshape Phoenix's understanding of its technology landscape. The helicopter touched down on my estate's private landing pad with precision that reflected Captain Morrison's military training and specialized equipment capabilities. Ground lighting illuminated landscaped gardens that surrounded a 6,000-square-foot house most Phoenix residents didn't know existed, though it had been featured in architectural publications that identified the owner only as a prominent technology entrepreneur who values privacy. Marcus Rodriguez and his security team had already secured the property perimeter and activated surveillance systems that would monitor media attention and potential security complications during the coming weeks. The transition from invisible business operator to public figure required protection protocols that extended far beyond routine executive security arrangements. As the helicopter's engines wound down to silence, my encrypted phone displayed a final message from Tyler in Denver. Saw Phoenix News coverage of your helicopter departure. Mom called crying because she's proud, but wishes you'd warned her about becoming famous. Forbes wants to interview the whole family about raising a secret cybersecurity genius.
Secret cybersecurity genius. The phrase would become accurate once Monday's acquisition announcement revealed the true scope of Clark Cybersecurity Solutions and my role in protecting national infrastructure from digital threats that most Americans never recognized as existing. The pathetic loser who'd supposedly never amount to anything had become someone whose work prevented cyber warfare against the systems that kept modern society functioning. Walking from the helicopter toward my house, I reflected on the evening's dramatic conclusion to 20 years of careful planning and strategic invisibility. Brandon Mitchell's cruel assessment at Jessica Palmer's house party had indeed been prophetic, though not in ways he'd intended.
I had remained focused on technology rather than social conformity. I had chosen computers over conventional relationship expectations. I had prioritized long-term achievement over immediate social acceptance. But those choices had created outcomes that exceeded his pharmaceutical sales success by factors he couldn't comprehend. The quiet girl in the computer lab had built something that required private helicopters, security teams, and government clearances that protected infrastructure most people never considered vulnerable. The reunion had served its purpose as dramatic revelation, but it had also provided closure to emotional wounds that had influenced 20 years of professional development. Brandon Mitchell's dismissive cruelty had motivated achievements that transformed national cybersecurity capabilities while generating wealth that exceeded the GDP of small nations. Tomorrow would bring media interviews, industry analysis, and public recognition that would end my anonymous period permanently. But tonight, standing on the landing pad of my private estate, while news helicopters maintained respectful distance, I felt the satisfaction that comes from proving that teenage predictions about potential can be spectacularly, devastatingly wrong. The pathetic loser had become the invisible force protecting American digital infrastructure. The girl who'd supposedly never amount to anything had achieved everything Brandon Mitchell had assumed was impossible. Justice had been served with helicopter-powered precision. Monday morning arrived with Arizona's desert sunrise painting the McDowell Mountains in shades of copper and gold, but the peaceful natural beauty couldn't compete with the digital storm that had erupted across Phoenix media markets since Saturday night's helicopter revelation. I stood in my home office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of Scottsdale's pristine desert landscape, while reviewing coverage that had transformed me from invisible business owner into the subject of international business analysis within 48 hours. The Wall Street Journal's Monday edition featured a front-page story titled "The Invisible Empire: How a High School Valedictorian Built a 9-Figure Cybersecurity Company in Complete Secrecy." Forbes had published an exclusive online feature about America's most private entrepreneur emerges after $400 million acquisition deal. CNN Business was running hourly updates about the defense contractor who hid in plain sight for 20 years.
But it was the local Phoenix coverage that provided the most detailed analysis of Saturday night's dramatic revelation. Channel 12 News had interviewed reunion attendees who'd witnessed my helicopter departure, creating a narrative that combined high school nostalgia with corporate success in ways that elevated both drama and inspiration. Brandon Mitchell's pharmaceutical sales career had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating others based on teenage social dynamics. Jennifer Walsh arrived at precisely 8 a.m. with her usual efficiency, carrying leather portfolios that contained interview requests, partnership proposals, and strategic communications plans for managing the transition from anonymous business operator to public figure. Her 5 years of managing my deliberately invisible professional life had not prepared her for coordinating media attention that exceeded most celebrity publicity campaigns. The acquisition announcement has generated interest from 63 media outlets, she said, spreading documents across my mahogany conference table. Forbes wants exclusive access for their upcoming cover story. Harvard Business School is requesting case study participation about building classified government contractor businesses. The Pentagon's procurement office has indicated interest in expanding our current contracts based on public validation of our capabilities. Public validation of capabilities that had operated through classified channels for 2 decades. The irony wasn't lost on me that Saturday night's personal vindication had created professional opportunities that might not have existed without the dramatic revelation of my success. Government agencies that had quietly utilized my cybersecurity systems were now prepared to publicly acknowledge their effectiveness, creating business development possibilities that anonymity had prevented. My encrypted phone displayed updates from Marcus Rodriguez, who'd been monitoring social media coverage and potential security implications of my newfound visibility. Local news interviews with reunion attendees have generated mostly positive coverage, though Brandon Mitchell declined comment when approached by reporters. His pharmaceutical company has received inquiries about their cybersecurity needs following media coverage of your business success. Brandon Mitchell declining comment. The image of him avoiding reporters who wanted to discuss his public humiliation of someone whose business success exceeded his comprehension carried poetic justice that satisfied emotional wounds that had influenced 20 years of professional development. His dismissive cruelty had motivated achievements that now served as case studies in entrepreneurial determination and strategic business building. The morning's first interview was scheduled with CNN Business, conducted via secure video conference from my home office to maintain operational security protocols that remained necessary despite my emergence from anonymity. The reporter, Michelle Chen, had spent 3 days researching Clark cybersecurity solutions and the implications of my acquisition deal for the broader cybersecurity industry.
Miss Clark, she began, her questions reflecting sophisticated understanding of government contracting and classified project requirements. You've built what appears to be one of America's most successful cybersecurity companies while maintaining complete invisibility for 20 years. Can you explain the strategic thinking behind such extreme privacy? The question addressed the core paradox that would define coverage of my business story: how someone could achieve massive success while remaining completely unknown to industry publications, business networks, and professional associations that typically tracked entrepreneurial achievement. Privacy wasn't a strategy initially, I replied, using carefully prepared language that had been reviewed by both legal counsel and government security officers. It began as an operational necessity. When you're protecting classified government systems, publicity creates security vulnerabilities that could compromise national infrastructure. Over time, that operational requirement became a competitive advantage. Competitive advantage through invisibility. The concept challenged conventional wisdom about business development, marketing, and industry positioning that assumed success required recognition, networking, and public validation of achievements. My approach had proven that exceptional work could generate extraordinary results without any publicity or professional visibility. The interview continued for 90 minutes, covering topics that ranged from technical algorithms to government contracting procedures to the personal motivation that had sustained 20 years of disciplined focus on cybersecurity innovation. Michelle Chen's questions revealed sophisticated research into my background, including details about my high school academic achievements and the teenage social dynamics that had influenced my adult professional choices. Industry analysts are calling your reunion helicopter departure one of the most dramatic business revelations in Phoenix history, she said during our conversation's final segment. Was Saturday night's helicopter arrival planned specifically for maximum impact? Maximum impact. The question required careful navigation between truthful acknowledgement and strategic communication about personal motivations that had driven Saturday night's orchestrated revelation. The helicopter departure had indeed been planned for dramatic effect, but the deeper purpose involved psychological closure rather than publicity generation. Sometimes personal milestones and professional transitions align in ways that create memorable moments, I said, avoiding specific details about Brandon Mitchell's role in motivating 20 years of achievement that had culminated in Saturday night's vindication. The reunion provided appropriate timing for ending my privacy period.
After the CNN interview concluded, Jennifer Walsh provided updates about the broader media response to my emergence from anonymity. The Phoenix Business Journal had published an analysis of local technology companies that had been operating without public recognition. Arizona State University's business school was developing case study materials about government contractor success strategies. The city of Phoenix had expressed interest in featuring my company in economic development materials that highlighted local entrepreneurial achievement. But the most significant development involved contact from other reunion attendees who'd witnessed Saturday night's revelation and wanted to acknowledge their own assumptions about my post-graduation trajectory. Angela Reeves had called requesting an interview for Phoenix Magazine about local business success stories. Roberto Sanchez had offered legal services for managing the complex contracts that accompanied government cybersecurity work.
Michelle Foster had sent a handwritten note apologizing for underestimating my professional achievements and expressing pride in our shared Westfield High School heritage. These responses represented validation that extended beyond simple business success into the realm of social recognition that my teenage self had craved but never received. Former classmates who'd viewed me as socially awkward and professionally irrelevant were now seeking association with achievements they'd never imagined possible. Around noon, my secure phone rang with a call from Daniel Kim, my chief technology officer, who'd been fielding partnership inquiries from companies that wanted to license my cybersecurity algorithms. The public validation of our capabilities had created business opportunities that were previously unavailable through classified government channels. Madison, we've received preliminary acquisition interest from 3 Fortune 500 companies beyond the North Star deal, Daniel reported, his voice carrying excitement that reflected the magnitude of opportunities emerging from my transition to public visibility. Microsoft wants to discuss integration of our zero-day detection systems with their enterprise security platforms. Amazon is interested in our algorithms for protecting cloud infrastructure. Google has requested meetings about incorporating our threat assessment capabilities into their government contracting operations. Fortune 500 acquisition interest that exceeded the North Star deal by substantial margins. My emergence from anonymity had created competitive bidding scenarios that could generate wealth beyond anything I'd imagined when building the company through quiet government contracts and classified project work. But the most emotionally satisfying contact came from my mother, Patricia Clark, who'd spent the weekend fielding calls from relatives and neighbors who'd seen news coverage of my helicopter departure and wanted to understand how her quiet daughter had become a cybersecurity entrepreneur worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
"I'm proud of you," she said during our afternoon phone conversation. "But I'm also confused about why you never told me about the complete scope of what you'd built. I knew you were successful, but private helicopters and government contracts were never part of our discussions." Privacy had been necessary protection for both my business operations and my family security. But it had also created emotional distance that I was now prepared to address through honest communication about my professional achievements and personal motivations. 20 years of secrecy could finally end, replaced by authentic relationships that acknowledged my actual identity rather than carefully constructed facades. The afternoon brought additional interview requests and partnership proposals, but also time for reflection about the broader implications of Saturday night's dramatic revelation. Brandon Mitchell's dismissive cruelty had motivated achievements that exceeded his comprehension, but the deeper satisfaction came from proving that teenage assessments of potential could be catastrophically wrong. The pathetic loser who'd supposedly never amount to anything had built systems that protected American digital infrastructure from foreign cyber warfare. The girl who'd been dismissed as socially awkward and professionally irrelevant had created algorithms that secured communications for presidents and prime ministers. The teenager who'd eaten lunch alone in the computer lab had developed cybersecurity capabilities that prevented attacks on financial markets, election systems, and military databases. Evening brought the day's final interview, this one with Forbes, for their upcoming cover story about my transition from invisible entrepreneur to public business figure. The conversation focused on lessons that could be applied by other technology entrepreneurs, particularly women who faced similar challenges in male-dominated industries. What advice would you give to young women who are interested in cybersecurity but concerned about industry obstacles? The Forbes reporter asked during our conversation's concluding segment. The question connected my personal journey to broader issues about gender representation in technology fields and the importance of perseverance despite social obstacles that could discourage technical career development. Focus on building something excellent rather than seeking recognition for building it, I replied, distilling 20 years of experience into practical guidance that could benefit others facing similar challenges. Excellence creates its own opportunities,
even when those opportunities take longer to materialize than expected. Excellence creating opportunities. The principle had guided every decision I'd made since graduation, from choosing technical expertise over social conformity to prioritizing long-term achievement over immediate recognition. Saturday night's helicopter departure had represented the culmination of that philosophy, demonstrating that patient preparation could generate dramatic results. As I prepared for sleep that Monday evening, Phoenix's city lights sprawled beneath my mountain estate like digital circuits that mirrored the cybersecurity systems I'd developed to protect them. The reunion was over. The revelation was complete. The transition from anonymous business operator to public entrepreneur had begun. Brandon Mitchell's pharmaceutical sales career would continue within its established limitations, but his confident assessment of my potential had been permanently disproven through helicopter-powered vindication that would be remembered long after his sales territory was reassigned to someone else. The pathetic loser had become the invisible protector of American digital civilization. The girl who'd supposedly never amount to anything had achieved everything teenage cruelty had assumed impossible. And tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chapters in a story that had been 20 years in the telling, but was just beginning its most interesting developments. The quiet revolution was over. The visible empire was about to begin. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.